Right, hello friends. Sorry for that little bit of a delay there, getting going. For those of you who catch the notifications, hello. Am I in the picture? Not quite. Let me lean over here. Nice shot of my bald head. My name's Dan Nelson. I'm an artist. This is Daily Art Adventure. Well, let's make it legal and official. Number 772. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, I've done this 772 times. Just before I started broadcasting this morning, I actually went back to Facebook, which is where I started on January 1st, nearly 3 years ago, 2017, when I decided to do this. I had no idea if it would stick, if it would be a good idea, if I would stick with it, but indeed I have. It turns out it's a big part of my life, a big fun part of my life. I discovered some time into it that I love doing art, and sometimes I really do need to be by myself, but most of the time I love doing art with you guys watching. So I can't even explain that. I don't even know why that's the case. I just know that it is. All right, so I started this painting yesterday afternoon, and I started out with watercolor pencils, which I've now put, well, here's some watercolor pencils, some other ones. Starting with light colors. I think I did pink, then some kind of orange red, then purple and blue. Purple in one hand, blue in the other. And then the part of this operation that I did not show you was last night, before I went to bed, I came upstairs and did, now where's my little piece of scrap paper? I really do want that. Hang on just a second. I came up and did pen and ink. What I'm looking for right now is a strip of, sorry about that, this is not very professional, is it? Okay, well, that is very peculiar. It was right here, I promise. All right, I'm not going to waste any more time. I have because I had to cut this out to a specific custom size, I had a piece of watercolor paper, a strip left over, which is very helpful for testing colors and so on. Anyway, good tip. Try not to do like I've done just now and lose it. So, hello Brenda, aka Michael. When are you going to get your own name there, Brenda? It is Brenda, right? All of a sudden I'm drawing blank. So let me go back to wide angle for just a second. You can see I think this is sold by Jerry's Artorama, which, as you can tell, is my local go-to art store. And boy, months ago, I was out of town. I was somewhere else doing artwork. And all of a sudden, I found myself needing some supplies. And you know what? There was no art store in town. I mean, there was a Michael's and a Hobby Lobby. Nothing wrong with either of those. And AC Moore. Craft stores. But no art store. Boy, I am spoiled rotten. So all those of you who have a good art supply store in town, let's give 3 cheers for local art stores, art supplies. Anyway, that's where that comes from. Hello, Jane. Good to have you here, and a wonderful friend from Asia somewhere. Thank you for joining us. Okay, quick. Here is the image, the reference that I'm working from. This is a wedding in Sedona, Arizona. And this is a commission piece, of course. I'm being paid. This is one of my after-wedding paintings. I do a lot of wedding paintings, but I also advertise that I can do, if I wasn't at your wedding, I can do a painting from the photograph. All right, time to think seriously about what I'm going to do here. Deborah, thank you, Deborah. Forgive me, not Brenda. Those two names are in the same category for some reason, in the same bucket in my memory. So thank you, Deborah. Appreciate that so much. And Cruise Hog, man, it's been a long time since we heard from you, my friend. Thank you. Glad to hear from you. This is what I call my watercolor sketch technique. So it's to draw a distinction from a legitimate, quote unquote, a legitimate watercolor technique. This is watercolor sketch, which means I can get away with all kinds of bad things, bad habits. Now, so it's watercolor pencil, pen and ink, and I'm going to finish going back and forth between watercolor, more ink, possibly using one of these Accurate Professional Waterproof Technical Pen. That's probably what I'll use if I do any cross-hatching, which I don't know if I will or not. And then I will probably cheat and use some opaque color. Again, because the fact that I call it a watercolor sketch, I'm not claiming that it's a watercolor. And this is what most of my followers, my fans, my people are accustomed to seeing. All right. Now let's zone in here a minute and think. For me, one of the benefits of doing a very tight drawing, accurate drawing underneath, is that it frees me up to be really loose with the watercolor technique. And I'm thinking is, what do I want? I'm asking myself, what do I want to retain as white? And I'm thinking the sky, low sky here, and I've got sketched in very lightly, I've got a bank of clouds, which would be nice. In the photograph, the sky is flat blue, not very interesting. But a little streak of cirrus clouds up there, that means not real energy clouds, just a little bit right there would be nice. I'll keep that white. And of course, I want to keep the bride's dress white. And then this patio that they're standing on, the far part of the patio behind them, I might want to keep that white. But I'm changing my mind, sort of. When I say white now, I don't mean exactly white. I don't mean completely white. So I just sprayed this whole thing with water, and you can already see a huge difference that is taking place. Tell you what, I'm going to move you guys. I'm going to give you a better perch, I think, so forgive me while I blind you just for a second. And several seconds, I should say. And there we go. And now you can see much more up closer there. Right? You got a better view of this painting than I do right now. Okay, and then a 3-inch brush. Sure, and I'm going to start with a new color. Last weekend, or 2 weekends, whatever, 2 weekends ago here in Raleigh, North Carolina, was the famous Art of the Carolinas trade show, art mart, demo, teaching, whatever, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I taught 3 classes there, all in oils. And one of the funnest aspects of that Art of the Carolinas is you get to try new stuff. So this is, in fact, this is one of the new stuff. This is Lucas Aquarelle Studio Cayenne pepper, cyan color blue, which I don't think I've ever used before. That's one of the things I like to do. Things are on a great sale at Art of the Carolinas, and so I make it a point to go around and try out things that I've never tried before. So this is one of those. This is a watercolor color that I am not completely accustomed to using. Cyan. Look, I would like someone to explain to me someday, technically, what is the difference between cyan and phthalo blue. Anybody? I should look that up. I'm assuming it's a different chemical pigment. I'm quite sure, but I don't mean so much that. I'd like to know, have it described to me in artistic terms, color terms. What is the difference between phthalo blue and what is often marketed, or is usually marketed as cyan? I'll just have to do a side-by-side test of my own, won't I, to get that question answered. All right, so some of you guys, some of you are expert watercolor painters, and you may be wincing at everything I'm doing right now. My guess is, though, you're not. If you're a good watercolor painter, some of you might be. Some of you tighties, some of you people who are tight, tight, tight. But the rest of you, if you're not expert at watercolor, then you should be going, wow. Okay, because listen, I think you know this, but I want to make it clear again. The great, great, great majority of artists, everybody who calls himself an artist painter, the great majority of us fit this description. We would say of ourselves, I paint, I wish I could paint looser, okay? And that is me as well. I am right there with you. And very often, and I just know that I'm further down the road. I'm down the road further from some of you, not all by any means, but some of you. And when I'm doing things like this, I often think of you guys, as they say in, oh, my brush is dripping. That's not a good thing. As they say in northern Minnesota, not to be confused with southern Minnesota, use guys. I often think of use guys when when I'm doing something noticeably loose, shall we say. Some of you should be taking notes. Some of you are saying, my goodness, I never thought of using a 3-inch brush. And I would say to you, well, about time you started thinking about using a 3-inch brush, okay? That's what I want to say. There, I'll consider it said. You should consider using a 3-inch brush. Now, what I'm doing at the moment is, of course, painting things. By the way, you see, I'm wanting the sky, wanting it to run this way, not this way. In fact, I'm going to hurry this process along a little bit because I'm going to go ahead and pick up this puddle of water right up here and this one right here. All right, because most of the watercolor, I want it running this way. You want to be a little bit careful. I have a tissue in my hand, right? You want to be a little bit careful about rubbing a tissue across watercolor paper. And this is nice arches, we say in America, Arche 300-pound. You know, this is some of the good stuff, not the 140-pound cheap stuff. Once you get used to 300, you really don't want to go back to 140. Just use 140 for, you know, little personal sketches and experiments. Okay, after boasting about my 3-inch brush, I'm going to swallow my pride. I think I am anyway. I'm not finding the brush that I want. I guess I'll go to a 2-inch brush. I'm not sure this brush has quite the edge that I want. You know what? It doesn't. Hang on just a second. I've got some other brushes here in my studio. Forgive me for this bad interruption. Well, it gives me a chance to show you for a moment, to show you my smaller. I have 3, 4, 5 watercolor kits. This is my next to smallest. Again, Lucas watercolors are good, by the way. Don't confuse the Lucas student grade oil paints with Lucas watercolor. Lucas watercolors are very good. I mean, everything's good. You know, I'm not being a snob here. I'm just saying. So there's a brush I'm looking for. Just telling you that Lucas watercolors are quite good. Hang on. All right, so 2-inch brush now. I'm looking and thinking. I think I'll continue with the cyan blue, but I'm going to add some green to that. I'm trying to decide which green. Okay, that's a little bit of peacock blue. I don't even know what that means. I'm not a big fan of paint companies, by the way, making up their own cutesy names. They're welcome to do that, but so I don't even know what company this is. I just, on the edge of my watercolor tray, I've written in Sharpie marker all around the edge what color I have in each well. And this one says peacock blue. I don't even know what manufacturer that is, but I could look it up and then find out what pigment it is. And I'd rather, little by little, as an artist, you begin to familiarize yourself with the various pigments, and that's what you really want to know. Again, that's why it's a little irritating when the paint companies use, again, what I call cutesy names, Skylark Yellow, or any of those things, any of those things. Because you don't, anyway, doesn't matter. Of course, we're painting with our eyes, not with our analytical, recipe like left brain. We're painting the colors, but it's good to know sometimes what the pigment is, because you begin to learn after a while how this pigment is going to interact with that pigment. When I was setting up a little while ago this morning, I was thinking, I've said this before, and I was kind of reflecting and sort of chuckling at this conversation I had one time, one of my daily art adventures. I have no idea which one. Oh, let's move your camera, sorry. There we go. Hello, Uncle 60. Hello, Barbara. On one of my broadcasts, I mentioned, I was talking about color and learning why do artists, most artists, mature artists, I would say most, not all, most mature artists who have certainly played around with all different kinds and styles of limited palette, but why do most artists end up using many colors on their palette, when in fact they all know, as you do, that you can get virtually any color you want, with a very limited selection of paint. So have you ever wondered that, right? In fact, even Mark Carter, who markets his limited palette quite a bit, New Geneva paints, I think he calls them. Well, why don't we all do that? And in fact, why don't most professional artists do not do the limited palette thing? Why? It's not because they're unable or uneducated or incapable of, creating a full range, so to speak, quote unquote, full range of colors from a limited palette. We are, and everybody should, students especially, should start out with a limited palette, because a full range of colors is more likely to be a handicap to early journey painters. But let me answer my question. Why do most artists then not stick with a limited palette? The reason is because none of the paints that we use are perfect in the chemistry class sense of the word. No, I didn't mean that. In the physics class, that's what I mean. Okay, sorry. They are as perfect as chemistry can get them. What I mean is this: perfect colors are almost entirely theoretical. Okay, perfect colors are essentially only in theory. There's no such thing as a perfect color except in the realm of physics, and that is where you take a perfect white light, which is, again, almost theoretical, and through a prism you break it into its components, the famous rainbow prism, right? Those are perfect colors. The only perfect colors, in fact, I think that's why even as children, we just will look at do you remember the first time you looked at a prismatic color, like maybe sun was coming through the window and it was hitting some kind of prism, anything, and it cast a prism onto, the floor or the wall or something, and you can just gaze at those colors, and it just takes your breath away. The beauty, the perfection, the purity of those colors. Are you with me now? Those are perfect colors. Those colors cannot be. They can be pursued and emulated and imitated in the chemistry realm, that is by mixing pigments, but never are they fully achieved. So that's what I'm saying. Perfect color is theoretical. You cannot, none of us paint with perfect colors. All right, so that's answer number one. Why don't we just all use limited? Because all the pigments that we use are imperfect one way or the other. Now, some of the most perfect are cadmium reds, and cobalt blues, neither of which I use because they're both potentially toxic. Again, I'm not greatly alarmed. Don't go around being afraid of those, but I simply don't use them. Now, I am using them, by the way, in my watercolor, so I'm not going to stick the brush in my mouth, and I might be a little bit careful. If I'm smart, I'll be a little bit careful about, getting the water, my rinsing water, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Maybe I could stop it, maybe not. Okay, so let me continue. Why do we use multiple colors? The answer is because there's no such thing as a perfect color. Everything we use is a rough approximation of the physics realm color, the colors that we can get from a prismatic, breakup of perfect white light. And all these pigments, whatever it is, and I'm assuming, interrupt here, I'm assuming that you're all aware of the fact that pretty much all good paint manufacturers, they list on the back of the tube somewhere, they tell you what pigment or pigments, God help us, because if you find a color that has more than one pigment, then it's not a real color. It's a made up. I don't know, again, I don't know if you know that or not. But if you pick up a tube of, say, Indian yellow, I just did this the other day. I said, so what the heck? Because I've heard that Indian yellow is made from the urine of camels that have been fed only blank, and I forget what the blank is, but some mango leaves or something like that. Okay, so that's traditional, ancient Indian yellow. I don't know if that's true, but I was told by a reasonably intelligent person, you can Google it and find out if I'm right, that Indian yellow traditionally is made from the urine of camels that have been fed only blank. It might have been mango leaves, I'm not sure. But now, that is no longer the case. Now they have sort of fake Indian yellow. And the ingredient, the pigment for Indian yellow is diarylide. So it's a word just like diary, D-I-A-R-Y, diary, with L-I-D-E at the end of it, diarylide. And I was so troubled by the pronunciation of that word that I actually had to go and online and ask Google to pronounce it. What is the pronunciation of diarylide? Anyway, so that's it, diarylide. All right, so but it's just one pigment. Okay, so that means that's probably a good color. And once again, I didn't mean to get this deep into pigments, but here we go. So we never know where we're going here in this broadcast sometimes. I never know. Goodness knows if I don't know, you don't know either. So on the back of every tube of paint, there should be a P number. Real fine print. Look for it. Now this may not be this is certainly not the case with children's paints, and might not be the case with student grade paints always. But with professional grade paint, there should be a P number. That means there's, in fine print, there's the letter P followed by usually a 2 or 3 digit number. Usually. So I don't remember what Indian yellow, let's just say it's P187 or something like that. And as a matter of fact, thanks to Google, our wonderful magical mystery tool called Google, you can simply put in your phone P187, and I'm making that number up. I don't remember what the real number is. And most of the time, one of the options that will come up will be the pigment. So now here's something you should know. If there are two numbers, that is to say, if it says P187 and P23, then you know that you have a custom mix paint color in your hand. And generally speaking, those, and I'm being a little bit harsh here, but generally speaking, those are not as good because it's not a pure color. It's not made by one pigment. It's a color that's been built up by the paint manufacturer to fill in a blank in their rainbow of colors to try to fill in a blank. So they've mixed two pigments. They don't like to do it. They'd rather do pure colors than mixed, I think, is the feeling I have from paint companies. But sometimes they can't do that. So they go ahead and do a color that has two pigments in it. Now, part of the reason why that's not most preferred is because, let's say you have a tube of paint that has two pigments in it, and let's just say that the pigment numbers are 50 and 75, so simple, easy to remember numbers. If you have a tube of paint, and it has two pigment numbers, say 50 and 75, they're mixed together. Well, the paint company has pre-mixed those for you. Well, then theoretically, you ought to be able to go buy a tube of paint that has pigment number 50 in it and a tube of paint that has number 75 in it, and theoretically, you should be able to make that that color yourself and tweak it just the way you like it, okay? So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit deeper than I really should be on this topic. But let me get back to, while I'm talking, I need to buy an extension, I need to go get an extension cord for my camera that has the photograph on it. So I'll keep talking. So I haven't really given the final reason. Why do most professional artists not use a limited palette? All right, here it is. Because these various and sundry pigments, P numbers, because they are chemicals, they mix with each other in various and sundry ways. Are you with me now? So the analogy I started at the beginning of this talking about when I was a kid, when I really started playing around with painting, and I was about 12 years old. And watercolor at the time is common for children or youth to, I think, gravitate toward watercolor. It seems like a safe medium. That was the case with me. So I was messing around with watercolor, and I had a watercolor book, like a Northlight or something like that. Some real common, real well-known watercolor book. And I remember discovering sort of the magic, if you will, of what happened when I mixed Payne's Gray with Hooker's Green. Now, let me hasten to say this. Hello, Barbara from Michigan. I bet it's cold up there, isn't it? Getting close to Thanksgiving, you probably already have had your first snow, maybe your third. I don't know. It depends, of course, which part of Michigan you're in. But I treasure my Michigan childhood memories very much. So I remember as a kid having just this aha moment about mixing Hooker's Green in watercolor. What happens when you mix Hooker's Green on the paper? I don't mean mixing it on a palette. I mean mixing like you do on watercolor. And last time I said that, or one time I said that, then somebody came back and said, well, what? What was it? What was it? What happens? No, you're missing the whole point. This is not a analytical This is purely visual. So that is just one example. Everybody needs, quote unquote, you know, like you need to do anything. I'm not here to tell you what you need to do. But as if everyone needs to experience, no, I needs to define what happens. No, 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 this is not about definition. For me, it was a purely, I'll say almost purely visceral, visual sense of wonder. Not something you put in a recipe book and say, now if you mix Hooker's green with Payne's gray, you'll notice that buddly, 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 buddly. No, 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 no. It was much more like like maybe my impression of vintner's wine, or sommelier, you know, description of wine, you know, touches earthiness with, you know, a nutty afterglow, or, you know, silly language. It seems silly to me. I'm sure it's very serious for the wine people. Anyway, no, so don't ask me, well, what was it? No, no, no. My point is, as with a sense of childlike wonder at age 12, 13, 14, I don't remember what it was. It was purely visual. It was like, oh, wow. I remember the sensation. And see, that's the kind of experience I think most of us, most of you should, or would be good to experience in your painting. So that's the main answer, in my opinion, why most professional artists do not use a limited palette, is because they've discovered that when they mix, and I'm just being arbitrary here, when they mix Scarlet Lake, and of course it depends on which company made the Scarlet Lake, but when they mix, say, Scarlet Lake with Viridian Green, boom, something happens. And I'm not telling you, I'm just making that up. Do you understand? So that's why many of us, most of us, tend not to use a limited palette. Hey, I learned in school that you can make all these colors with just 3. How come you guys must be dumb because you have to buy a tube of green, and I can make green all by myself? That's my stupid voice. One of my many stupid voices, I guess. So does that make sense to you? So no, 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 please don't tell me that we're dumb because we have to buy many different colors of paint. Quite the contrary. We are some of us, fully capable of, and everybody should play with limited palette. I absolutely, and all beginners should actually start, in my opinion, with limited palette, because unlimited palette is just way too much freedom for an early journey painter. You'll just get yourself in more trouble than anything trying to use a wide palette. All right, now let's talk, I guess, a little bit about my painting here. So far, all of this has been done with a 3-inch brush and a 2-inch brush. So, and yep, I do recommend that kind of thing, especially for you tighties. Now, of course, I'm going to use some smaller brushes here. But, I'd say 85% of the watercolor painting is done. Now, I'm going to do some lifting. Some of you saw that coming, didn't you? I bet she's going to lift. I bet she's going to lift. And you are correct. So I've got a little bit of a stiffer brush here. The first thing I want to lift out is some of the pencil out of the bride's dress, because I don't want it that strong. So I'm being a little bit rough on the paper right now. Does that translate? Does that make sense? It does. So, you know, you want to be cautious about rubbing. Watercolor paper is tough, but it's not. Now, on the other hand, it's not tough, because as soon as you do something like this, I'm thinking way larger than the molecular level, but certainly the fiber level, at the level of paper fibers, I've messed up that paper, so it's not going to behave like virgin watercolor paper. But that's all right. But it gives you caution then, and the same, even blotting like this, you know, messes with the fibers. I'm trying to decide where to go next, what to do next. Of course, I've had this thing, you know, gravity is going this way. I think you can tell that. And I've got some running that I'm not crazy about. Like, I'm not crazy about this hard edge right here. I'm not sure I can do anything about it. This, the blue, no, that looks like that's set pretty well. That's all right. It's not too bad. I'll add to that later. One of the areas that is crying out for to be lifted most are all of the faces. As you can imagine, oh, Barbara. Oh, what were your pumpkins and squash doing in the garden at this hour? Huh? Let's pumpkin and squash and pumpkins, yeah. You knew you were living dangerously, weren't you? Didn't you? Oh. I'm looking for here in my, by the way, here, can you see my, my tray of brushes that is part of my larger watercolor kit. I have a couple smaller ones, but that's one I watch. All right, and I have here a bristle brush. Now, hang on, I want to see if I've got, it's a little bit smaller than I would like. Here we go, here we go. There's a larger bristle brush. And by the way, you'll notice they're both, in both cases, these were oil painting brushes, right? And I've stuck this in a pencil sharpener. This one I just carved off, so it also doubles as a scratcher. Now, talk about messing up the fibers of the watercolor paper. This, again, I want to make sure that you're aware of that. You can do lifting, of course you can lift, but not with impunity. That is to say, it's not a freebie, because when you rub the paper this much and this hard, I'm not rubbing very hard, but the harder you rub, the more you're going to alter the texture of the paper. Does that make sense? So you want to rub with caution, because it's costing you something. What it's costing you is the surface of the paper is being modified. Frankly, it'll get more fuzzy. Anything that I now paint on top of these areas where I've rubbed, it won't behave the same way as on a piece of what I'm calling virgin 300-pound Arche watercolor paper. So again, I do it because I have to, and this is all part of the plan, but I don't want to do any more than I have to. Some of you, I hope, some of you are going, wow, I would never have thought of, perhaps you would say, of letting there be this much blue and green on top of the faces of these people. Look at this man here. Look at his hair, the top of his head. That's just all bleed over, right? And the front of his face is green. Top. So I just, again, I'm pointing out the abstraction. I'm going to scrub the bride's face. Of course, the psychological focal point of the painting is the bride's face. And I'm scrubbing quite gently with a bristle brush. So there you go. Some of you watercolor, perhaps novices, add some hog bristle brushes to your watercolor kit, because they're excellent for scrubbing. You can do it with watercolor, but you'd have to be scrubbing a lot longer. All right, now the line of this man's hair, I like it, but it's just a little bit much, right? So let's just tone that down a little bit. And you can see here up close, you can still see especially the orange watercolor pencil drawing, right? In fact, let me back up just a little bit, sorry. Yeah, tiny little faces indeed. I am not going to try to do portraits. I did the ink drawing last night, and frankly, I was fairly happy with the likeness, the degree of likeness that I've captured. Of course, you can do hyper-realism with watercolor, but that's not how I advertise my watercolor wedding paintings. Generally speaking, my watercolors are a little bit more abstract than my oil paintings. But I take the orange, and there's purple, orange, blue, and pink in here. And of course, when I re-wet it, it all becomes soupy, and they all run together. Now we're back to the subject of most of us, myself included, are tight by nature. Therefore, any tricks that we can come up with to trick ourselves into being loose, then I'm for that. Does that make sense? Now let me show you in the watercolor pencil. If there's a line that you really don't like I really don't like this particular orange line on the bride's upper arm. I've just obliterated. There's just you can still barely see it, but that's good enough. All right. So what I'm pointing out is using my crazy technique of watercolor pencil underneath. For the most part, see, this orange appears everywhere throughout the whole painting, as does the blue, and I'm not seeing as much of the pink, but it's there. It's just a lighter color. And I like that play of color. I like the fact that there's bits of orange everywhere. It creates, among other things, it helps create a unified color palette. Does that make sense? So it's a trick that I really enjoy. And of course, the sun's coming from the right, and these men, the front of their face is in shadow. So of course that's being accomplished even already to a large degree by the blue that's on the front. Now there's a blob of white on this is a little bit dangerous. I don't like doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm messing around with the wash that I did over this girl's head. And again, any of you who are watercolor painters, you know, what's some good analogy? What's a good language? A pure wash is what you get when you slather. Is that a word? When you slather water, no, a cross between splash and lather, watercolor paint, loose, wet, across the canvas. You get a wash, right? And a virgin wash is one that hasn't been touched. After it dried, you leave it. And I think all of you, some of you, if you're a new watercolor person, then listen to me. A virgin wash is as perfect as it's going to get. Any touching you do of the wash after that will corrupt it. Now, we're in the business of corrupting virgin washes, but it's best whenever you can to let a virgin wash just stay virgin. Don't go in and adulterate it. Don't go in and mess with it. Just let it be. And to me, I think that's the number one beauty of watercolor, is those perfect washes that you cannot fake. You can't, well, actually you can with an airbrush. You know I'm in trouble when I break out an airbrush to touch up a watercolor painting. It has been done, but I'm not going to tell you when and where. But so there's a cheat for almost everything, isn't there? Most of you probably don't have an airbrush, but there are other ways to try to do it as well. But airbrush is probably the most high-tech and most successful way to fake a virgin wash. So I just messed with the wash around this girl's head because there was a big white blob that was not a good shape. And I'm trying to disguise the fact that I messed with it. And I almost did it, except there's a bit of a edge right there that I think if I can get away with that much, you know, if I can let that stay, I will. So I'm still lifting, again, with a hog hair bristle brush, an oil painting brush, because it's a little stiffer, therefore a little bit rougher on the paper, you understand, right? Let me zoom in for just a minute. Hang on, let me pull my control panel closer to me. So some of my favorite, at the moment, some of my favorite parts of this painting are up here, which is nice. I mean, you know, that's not the focal point, but it's pretty important. That's a virgin wash. All of that. What is a virgin wash? It was wet, 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 and then I just let it dry. And then haven't touched it. That means it's virgin. And pretty much all of that's going to stay. Now look at like this big blue thing right here. Well, there's a shadow up here, not down here. That's a quote-unquote mistake as far as realism goes. I'm looking at the photograph and go, oh, heck yeah, I can easily work that in. All I need to do is come in and darken this. Now, when I say I'm not going to mess with a virgin wash, that doesn't preclude that I can come and paint on top of this. I mean, not on top of, I mean, on top of little bits. Does that make sense? But I'm not going to mess with things like the little white holes. That's classic watercolor. Same thing up here in the sky. This is all virgin wash. I probably won't do a thing to the whole sky. You know, it's a little bit hard edge right there. Who cares? It looks like a cloud, doesn't it? There's a little bit of a blossom. That means the darker greenish orange color here bled up into the sky. Well, let's just play with it. Let's just say, okay, let's say, I could live with that, by the way. That doesn't bother me too much. But just for practice, I think I can get away with a little bit of manipulating or messing with this virgin wash right here. Once again, clean water, bristle brush, 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 ruining the virgin surface of the paper. Now, of course, okay, we're getting the full-on watercolor lesson, I guess. Here, I didn't know we'd go this way, but I hope there's a watercolor person watching somewhere that needs this. Okay, different colors, different tubes of paint, different pigments lift better than others. The staining colors, and you could probably just Google that. What are the staining colors in watercolor? They don't lift very well at all. But see, what I don't want is any kind of hint, any kind of edge up here that I did this. And I think I can get away with that. Now, I have not perfectly eliminated that little blossom, but it's pretty much. Yes, ma'am.
Something was printed. Did it actually print?
It didn't. Do you want to email it to me?
I guess.
Say that?
I don't know how to do it. It's a return form for the electronic.
You have to download. You can't print it from Chrome. You have to download it to your computer and then print it. You don't know how to do that, probably, right? Sorry. If you do email it to me, let me know. Okay. Home business. Where was I? Okay, so I've lightened that. It's okay. It's good enough. I have a couple. Oh, let me broaden here a little bit. I have a couple blue watercolor pencil lines. Blue and purple going up here, an orange one here. Again, it looks like a Dan Nelson painting that because it's got these random streaks, marks going through it. Even the lines that could be interpreted as cloud lines done with ink, very abstract, and it matches because this whole thing is, because there's ink lines, it's all somewhat abstract. All right, where should we go from here? I think the next biggest color element in the painting is flesh tones. So let's look for a a nice brush here, the right size, the right shape. I am a funny one in watercolor. I gravitate very strongly toward flats. Really, I'm not telling you to be like me at all. Now, I was somewhere recently. I was encouraged to see that one of my watercolor heroes, it may have been Alvaro Castanet, I don't know, somebody like that. I was encouraged to see that he did the same. He really favored his flats as opposed to rounds. There's some excellent watercolor painters that use a lot of rounds. Way better than I am. But for some reason, and this goes back literally decades, I was a watercolor major, sort of, if there is such a thing. I was a watercolor major in college. And I'm sure began my habits, good or bad, began my watercolor habits way back then. I'm standing up again looking for my strip of scrap. Scrap watercolor paper. Not finding it, so forgive me just a second. Let me go over here and find another piece of scrap, something. Here we go. This will do. So here's a part of watercolor painting that didn't survive. And I want to see if this is the color I want for a flesh tone. So here's where I'm mixing over here. I've only dropped one brush on the floor so far this morning. That's good. It's a good morning. Nope, I want more red than that. I think that might be about right, but just make it thinner than that. Turn my phone reference back on. By the way, smartphones, it turns out, nope, they need to be redder. Smartphones are very good for matching color as opposed to computer screens or tablet, iPad screens. Smartphones are much, much better for matching color. Just one of those. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to add some water to that well right there. All right, I think that's good enough. So that's what you use a piece of scrap watercolor for. Does that make sense? And it's ideal if it's actually a piece of this same paper, because then you know you're getting exactly the same color. So here we are doing some tongue painting, right? Now this is, I mean, I'm almost embarrassed painting this way, right? It's like coloring in the lines. Except, I'll defend myself to this degree, except that the paper is still damp. So that means all these marks that I'm doing, whoops, I just painted over her mouth. Too bad. That means I'm going to have to come back with some opaque white. I probably would have done that anyway, but I'd rather, that was a mistake. I would rather have kept that white, so I had the option of not doing opaque on top of her teeth. I'm quite happy with the groom's, and pretty happy with the bride's likeness as well. That again, that was done very quickly, no muss, no fuss, just slap it down in ink, and I was fairly happy with the result. Here's a little trick I've learned when you're doing watercolor flesh tones. Make the first layer of, unless the person is a bright blonde hair, unless that's the case, make the first layer of color on her hair, on his or her hair, the same color as the flesh tone. Does that make sense? So whatever color, this orange, I just did the hair all the same color. It unifies, because you don't want too much of a separation, in my opinion. You don't want too much of a separation between the flesh tone and the hair. All right, I'm pausing here. As you can tell, you hear the pause in my voice, don't you? Just dropped another brush, for those of you keeping score. I'm going to use the same color to do these little, you know, Grecian urn kind of things. And whenever I draw a Grecian urn, I always think of Maxfield Parrish. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just do a Google search for Maxfield Parrish, hit image, and then start flipping through his images, and you'll say, oh yeah, Grecian urns. Oh, I started to say I'm tight, but the paper is still wet, so the flesh tone that I just put down is going to bleed a little bit. I'm thinking about the railing. As you can see, I roughed it in. I painted around it very quickly. In reality, that brush is kind of like well, I don't know, but that railing, I mean, is rusty. I'm looking at it carefully to see, what color is it? Yeah, it's rusty. But I don't think it's Cortan steel. That's the kind of stuff that's supposed to be. No, it's definitely rusty. It might be Cortan steel. How about that? I don't think so. This is out in the southwest. The rust is not the problem out in that part of the world that it is here in the humid east. But in any case, I don't want it to be as bright, light and bright. Picking up brush, dropped brush number 2. I want it to be brown. It's too bright right now, so let's just see if we can get a brown color that we like. And of course, I say of course, I probably shouldn't say that, because some of you will go, no, I didn't know that was of course. I'm not going to get out a small brush and paint, you know, tongue painting. I'm certainly not. Whoops, sorry, hang on just a minute. I lost you for a minute. There we go. I'm not going to do small brush there. I might do some at the very end, but not at the beginning. So I just want to mix up a nice medium brown-ish, not too bright. So to unbrighten brown, you know, add ultramarine, add a blue. One of the, let me just confess right up front, in fact, I dreamt about this last night, I think, when I was in the middle of the night. Now that all of a sudden I remember, oh, wait, I had a dream about this painting. And I realized that one of the weaknesses of it, I mean, it's charming the way it is right now, but there's almost no play of light per se. It's just a flat copy of the photograph, which between you and me, I don't think my client would complain about. I don't think they'll complain about the way it looks right now. I don't think they'll complain at all, but I will complain. So I should have thought more about this. Certainly the white dress, boom. Light coming, we've got a bit of a shaft of light, you know, energy, I should say, more than light, coming this way. All right, but here's what I'm going to do. living dangerously a little bit. But I think a darker horizontal shaft behind all the wedding party would be a good idea. And not and all the men, by the way, are wearing, as far as I can tell, black suits or tuxes. A little bit hard to tell which from the photograph. Not blue. The blue that you see up until now is just, my first layer of darkness. I'll achieve the feeling of a black suit, black tux, by building up layers of color. So there we go. There we go. Just with that little bit right there, the painting is beginning to take on a little bit more visual cohesion, hanging together in an interesting manner. I'm going to create this dark line that goes behind all of the wedding party. Well, it goes behind, but it also bleeds out onto the men in their black suits, which will then really make the bride pop in her white dress. Yeah. Whew. And I've achieved then the brownness of the railing is adequate now. It doesn't pop out nearly the way it did. So I'm glad I did it the way it did. It's working out well. That is to say, I reversed, negative painted it, left it white so that it comes forward, but now with a glaze on top, it goes back nicely to where I want it to go. Okay, now sometimes we cheat, we put down a wash and then we blot it up immediately. Get away with that somewhat. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to do some opaque color, not just on the bride's teeth, but in fact on her face, which is even more. So all you watercolor purists are groaning, throwing your computers down, or your say, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's not a watercolor painter. Watercolor. In fact, that's what he is. He's a watercolor painter. Check. Guilty as charged. Making no pretense about being a serious watercolor painter at the moment. But I'm having fun and I'm getting paid, so better than you, Smedley. Sorry, just a little moment of nastiness escaped my lips. In jest, of course, in jest. Oh, besides, I have no idea who Smedley is. Clearly, nobody who's watching right now. But of course, you do get quite a bit of that on the internet. You're lousy, you're no good, you're terrible. And sometimes a person who says that is an artist, and you can find their work, and yes, you laugh out loud, saying, "What, really?" Ooh. Anyway, but of course, there's always the exception. Somebody better than me might be watching and scoring away. All right, boy. That one operation right there gives me a great deal of relief, and I'm about to do more of it. About to add more shadow to the foreground. I think I heard somebody call this little trick or this technique of making the foreground in a painting. Usually when I'm doing this, it's in oils, of course, but I'm doing the same thing here in watercolor. Making the foreground dark as a threshold, like stepping over a literal threshold across it through a doorway into a painting, into a scene. And it's one that I use a great deal. I think the majority of my paintings, I employ this trick of making the immediate foreground dark. I hope I don't overuse it. Anything like that you do a lot, then I'm in danger of overusing it, being in a rut, having a habit, stultifying my growth, artistic growth opportunities by being stuck in a rut. I don't think I'm that because I'm aware of it. It's the ruts that you're not aware of. They're the real dangerous ones. Anyway, and usually it's an effective trick. It is not. It was not indicated in the photograph that my client sent to me. We've got a strange kind of blossom happening down here in the corner, though. I don't know what is happening there. So, by the way, I was talking a while ago about a virgin wash. You can touch the wash as long as it's wet. As long as it's wet, it's still fair game for messing with. Once it's dry, then any more touching and then it's desecrating the virgin wash, and dangerous, because there's nothing more beautiful than the original first wash, and it's hard to achieve that. Now, one way to get around that in watercolor is real simple, is be a hyper-realist. Then, in that case, all you do is you just manipulate the heck out of all these washes. You just know how to blend one into another, and so on and so on and so forth. And of course, watercolor, by the way, is, in my opinion, is a wonderful tool for the control freak hyper-realists. I have a number of friends who, in fact, have followed that path, and good for them. And they beat me in competition sometimes and make more money and more famous than I am sometimes. But the watercolorists I admire most, I already said a while ago, Alvaro Castanet from Uruguay. I'm trying to say it with a proper Spanish. Uruguay. I'm sitting, leaning back, literally leaning back and thinking now. I think all my initial washes are. I'm going to play dangerous a little bit up here. I don't like the line that's forming up here. So I'm playing dangerously because I'm messing with the earlier, what I'm calling today a virgin wash. I'm not sure I've ever used that term before, but I think it communicates it. A wash that is put down and left alone. So I'm messing with it right now, which is not my preference, but I didn't like the line that was. I'm not messing with the second wash because it's still wet. Does that make sense? So it's not dry yet, so I can still manipulate it. But by going into that, I'm messing with the original, this original virgin wash, I'm calling it. All right. Do a little bit of shadow on those flowers. I'm thinking about taking a break. I might hit this with a hair dryer. Still trying to avoid that messing with that first wash. Yeah, looks pretty good. I have a very strange blossom down here in the corner of the paper, and I don't think I did that. I think that's something. I may have to mess with that later on to try to disguise that. That looks like some chemical or something hit the page before I started painting that is leaving that mark. Not pleasant, so I'll have to mess with that. Let me think. I may end this broadcast. Yeah, I tell you what. I called this broadcast. I called it Watercolor Washes, and Indeed, that's a good description of what I've done. And I think I'll stop this broadcast. I might paint for a while by myself. And oh, let me show you a funny little trick before we leave. Find something to point with. Here we go. So my pen and ink lines here indicate where the top of this hill, mountain, rock formation was supposed to be right there. Do you see? But I got a huge blossom of dark paint coming up here into the sky. So I have two options. One is to try to lift all that out, which would be very problematic. Or the other option is to say, oh, to heck with it. Let's just pretend that's where the hill is. I strongly, and again, I could show you the, so what the thing I just drew. Whoops, hang on. The thing I just drew is, come on. Oh, come on. Come on. There we go. Is essentially up in this part. So I'm adding a hill, a mountain that's not actually there. I'd be very astonished if anyone ever notices. So there. It's kind of when you can't beat them, join them. When you got a bad blossom, again, I could have done all kinds of things. You know, if it had been critical, I could have masked this off with masking tape, got out my magic eraser, and literally taken that back to white, which of course would have messed with, you know, would have been very fragile and stood a good chance of messing with all of the wash up there. So it's easier just to do it this way. And again, nobody but you and me. No, that's what's happening. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to end. Let me see what you guys are saying here. Uncle 60 says, check out Yong Chen. I will do that. Oh, there's so many great. And Bruce Hawk has another. Ian Fennelly. Uncle, how do you see a watercolor art? You don't. You put it behind glass. I'll get it. I'm about to get off.
I know.
Okay, so I'll see you in a minute, guys.